the Osceola, Kurt Weiler, and Jerry Cutts here with two pretty important people, I would say, in the Florida NIL world. I know Chip Lamarca, Corey Staniscia joining us now. I mean, they have been with the NIL amendment in the Florida law really since it first was a talking point. So we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Happy to be here.
We can start, I guess, right kind of at, I mean, y'all had, this has been a years long process kind of from when the discussions first started to, I mean, obviously Florida, I think, was the first or one of the first definitely states to pass an NIL law. And then obviously, I guess, how quickly was the need for the amendment seen? And I guess what's it like now to be at a place where it seems like Florida is kind of on equal footing nationally after such a long process?
Well, I'll grab the kind of the legislative and policy side, and Corey can talk about the, what it means to the business side and the sports world. So really, since the initial bill was 3 years ago, past that, and we became the first state to be effective July 1, 2021. Quite honestly, it was an issue that Corey, and I talked about. He kind of brought to me when he was my legislative aide, and we looked at what California did. We said, all right, we can do it better, because they were going to be effective in like 2023. Typical California, taking forever. They made a lot of concessions in their bill, and so we figured we could do a little bit better on the bill itself, but then be quicker to market. We were trying to get to July 1, 2020, and the Senate kind of tapped the brakes on us a little bit. Thank goodness, because we didn't know COVID was going to happen in the shutdown. But that said, July 1, 2021, this thing became effective, and almost immediately states repealed their laws in totality based on the fact that the NCAA kind of pulled back the entire section of their guidelines, and they hadn't come out with, or the rules, and they hadn't come out with guidelines to operate by. So we were stuck with these guardrails that we really kind of put in purposefully to make sure in case the NCAA came back at us with regard to institutional involvement or cause compensation. So we tried to get that back up last year, and I did not have Corey was in the outside world then, and Samantha and I did not have any luck getting, at the time, the Speaker of the House to hear the bill. Didn't realize at the time when we ran the initial bill, but it was not supportive of it. So this year, new speaker, talked quite a bit with he and leadership about the issue. And what's interesting is I'll just say it like it is, a lot of the SEC guys and gals were opposed to this legislation. Literally nobody else was, not male, female, black, white, Democrat, Republican. There was no group that was against this except for some SEC fans in the original bill. And there was a concern whether this would kind of ruin college sports and all that good stuff. Obviously, knowing now that everyone is involved in this world, from Tim Tebow to Nick Saban, those same members were 100% on board, and we had a successful 113-0 vote in the House and 34-0 vote in the Senate. And the governor signed it last Friday, and Corey and the folks out in the NIL market now have the tools to hopefully do it the best work they can do.
Yeah, Kurt, just to amplify that message, I mean, I think we knew this had to be updated pretty quickly. I mean, right before the law was supposed to go live on July 1st, 2021. I remember me and Representative Lamarca. I was still working for him at the time, and we were a couple of days prior to launch, and we were actually in Orlando at a conference. And all of a sudden on the TV, we were on one hand, we're having conversations with folks up in Tallahassee saying, hey, there's a good chance that a lawsuit is coming, right? We're preparing to get sued by the NCAA to stop the law from going into effect. And then all of a sudden, a couple of days before July 1, 2021, the NCAA comes out publicly and just waves the white flag. So we knew at that moment, we said, hey, this is great news, because it's kind of game over, and NIL is here to stay. We really did something here in Florida and really pushed this forward. But at the same time, we knew actually in that moment, we said, well, now there's, really probably, I guess, 35 plus states at that time who didn't have any law on the book. So there was going to be no rules and regulations from them. And now here we thought we were going to be the trailblazer, first to market. And then now we actually going to have all these different roadblocks. So it was actually probably a couple of days before July 1st of 2021 that me and Representative Lamarca knew there actually needed to be some updates. And it was unfortunate that we weren't able to get it done over the last 2 years. but we were able to get it done now, thanks to great new leadership in Tallahassee and Representative Lamarca.
Take you back a few years ago, both you and Chip. That first law that was passed, it specifically kept the schools out of the process of the NIL, and now the new law doesn't. What was the thinking back then as to why you wanted that distancing, and why now you don't?
I can take it. I can take it if you want. Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, I remember we were discussing that topic, in the Capitol. That was a few very long discussions as to, what does this look like? What does institutional involvement look like? And the ironic part about this is that it actually was language that came from the universities. This is stuff that the university said, without this language, we cannot be supportive. Because again, going back to 2020, this was a scary time for athletic directors and coaches. I mean, they were getting threats from all sorts of different places that if this were to happen and these things happen in these states, here are some of the negative repercussions that could happen, right? So that was it really was a brave new world. And I think a lot of athletic administrators and coaches were concerned about some form of retaliation from the NCAA. So they really wanted to kind of have that hands-off approach. But then all of a sudden, a few months later, we go 10 months down the road, there's a Supreme Court case, there's a whole bunch of white flag waving, and then all of a sudden they said, okay, hold on, we're actually good. We're not going to get punished for certain things. We now actually want to come back and relook at this. So I think it really was out of self-preservation. And at the time, it seemed like it was honestly, truly the necessary thing to do.
Well, was it fear of retaliation from the NCAA, or was that separation also to protect the institutions and thus the state from lawsuits if an NIL deal went bad?
Jerry, I would tell you, I would say a little of both, more of the latter. More of the latter. I think what's interesting is in this bill this year, and I didn't know that if we'd have the appetite really in the Senate and maybe with a few folks in the House, the liability we put in, the protections, because I think, from the very beginning, for me, this was about allowing it wasn't about making Florida State better than Florida or Florida better than Alabama, maybe better than Alabama. But for me, it was about making sure that kids have access to the free market, because there's no reason why you should be a football or swimming swimmer or, even some Olympic sports that, we're kind of tied up into this. You can't do anything based on your athleticism while you're in school. But meanwhile, a real estate student could, an engineering student could, a journalism student can go write and sell their work. So to me, it was just access. But we also, I define the free market as not necessarily a fair place, right? Having access to it, some things will succeed. Some kids will get great deals. Some kids might play like crap on, Saturday and get benched, and, you can't. The NIL deals aren't really pay for play, but at the same time, as a business owner, if I own a car dealership here in Tallahassee, and the kicker has a terrible day, and he's my endorser, I may decide to go a different way, and I just don't want the universities to suffer if that person in the free market, will say that student, but also that business person in the free market doesn't live up to their potential. They had an opportunity. So the liability piece was there. And then for this go around, it was really important for us. And I do want to kind of share that for me, this was about leveling the playing field, but for me, this was really about turning this process into an opportunity with the education piece, adding entrepreneurship, turning these young people into brands of their own. In other words, let's just take the 4% of kids who will play professional sports, men and women, off the table, and let's look at the 96%, or call it somewhere around that mid 90s percentage. If a kid builds a brand at Florida State and they're a golfer, and they're not good enough to go professional, but they're also studying risk and insurance at Florida State, they want to open up an insurance business. That notoriety they'll get off of their NIL deals, playing golf, can certainly tie into them opening up a State Farm office or something like that, and you can kind of use that model to anything. It could be a small business, it could be construction business, like my background. So I mean, I think getting them the opportunity to go into the real kind of called the business world, but also equipping them with the tools and these 2 classes somewhere along the time they're there, I think is really important. That's why I wanted to see more business acumen put into that, and also time management, things like that, because these it's not going to be all about NIL deals when the coach says, hey, I need you morning workout and afternoon practice.
So
I think it was important too, coming from think about Florida State and our friend Dylan Gibbons. He has a great nonprofit, Big Man, Big Heart, and because of our law, not because of the NCAA. Surprisingly, it wasn't because of them. Because of our state law, Florida State University actually couldn't promote or help him in any way, shape, or form with that organization unless he became an official sponsor of the university. So now with this new change, the Florida State University could have and been a part of his nonprofit and said, look, we're going to do a big thing to support Big Man, Big Heart at a FSU home basketball game or football game or a tailgate. So that's stuff that's important. And those are things that, again, these are things that we didn't contemplate, back in 2019, 2020, and who would have known what a collective was back then either. So, the law's always got to be updated. Things always change, whether it's in the insurance world or, we're dealing with different problems up in Tallahassee. We've got to be, flexible. We got to come back and we've got to look at laws and change them.
Corey, I know you've been involved at collectives surrounding a number of schools in the state, and Chip, I know you've obviously been a critical part as kind of the guy shepherding this bill and then the amendment as well. What's the feedback you got, I guess, in the early days from the coaches administrators, and then I mean during the time when it was the original bill, and now I guess in the time since finally the amendment has gone into place?
Well, Corey can kind of talk about the working hand in hand with them now, because he's got a great relationship working with, for example, Mike Kelly at USF. I would just tell you that there was a process. I don't really want to name names because it's not about, any of that right for us, but we said, all right, this can be a cool experience because we're both college football fans and sports fans, in general. I wouldn't say I was the biggest, but I'm certainly, as excited to be able to, meet with the athletic director from Miami, from my school, FAU, from here at Florida State, and from University of Florida. And what was interesting is, I won't say what university, but it's south of Orlando. But the athletic director's response, very first meeting we ever had, was, it's not about, offering these opportunities to the kids. It's about, so I'll just say that. And I said, no, without these kids, you don't have this. Specifically at that university, which I root for when they're not playing the team in Tallahassee. I would say the brand there was wholly defined and created based on what happened in the early 80s, what happened going into tough neighborhoods and getting kids to come play that sport. And then, having to corral some of that brand, we'll say, the next meeting was fantastic. It was with Florida Atlantic, and, kind of saw the reason for it. And I think, as I would just say this, the reason I brought that up is that first meeting was probably expected, because that's a big brand. They didn't know what this was going to be. No one did, right? I think as we sat down with universities, athletic directors, and even some presidents, when they understood our intent was just to create an opportunity for these kids and not in any way stop or create an impediment for any of their programs, I think they understood it. Great meeting, I think, was with the USF athletic director right up here in Tallahassee. I just like, I want to put your concerns at ease. The first thing we're going to say is, we're doing this for X, Y, and Z. We don't want to inhibit anything you're doing with the program. And we had a great conversation, but I had to kind of learn that, meeting with that athletic director, because they're kind of a big deal, right? I mean, they're on huge programs, and that's the person everyone's trying to get to. I just needed to make sure they understood we weren't trying to change what they were doing. We were trying to enhance it. And Scott Strickland at University of Florida is probably like the perfect coming together of that idea, because he was towards the end of us kind of getting the bill drafted. We went over to the University of Florida. We sat with him before a basketball game and really just said, here's what we want to do. We got it. And, a lot of programs just kind of, the concern or the veil of, this, like, what are they trying to do to our program was pulled away, and they understood we were just trying to help kids. Corey probably has some inside stories about, kind of the outside dealings and whatnot, but in having these conversations, I think it was about really us getting to a table and almost kind of having a bit of a understanding that we're not trying to change anything to an extent that would really harm what they're doing, but only enhance it.
I would ask, what were some of their concerns, the athletic directors?
Well, I think they're all still very, Corey can add to this, but I think they're all still very concerned about the NCAA. I mean, it took the last day. Corey has a little more insight on the behind the scenes, because I kind of vowed to just be straightforward with the legislative process. If there had to be some negotiating behind the scenes or some social media posts that encouraged this to happen, then, I kind of left that to him. But I would tell you that I think they were just afraid of the NCAA. I mean, and it took a phone call from Senator Hudson, to Senator Hudson, I think from Mark Emmert at the time, to put that at ease. And Corey probably has a little more on that.
Yeah, I think the schools truly were afraid of some sort of retaliation or retribution. I mean, I think, again, going back to that first meeting with the former athletic director of the University of Miami, and you guys might get a kick out of it. He said, we're going to get removed from the ability. We're going to lose the ability to play for a national championship. And I think my response after hearing him speak about athletes in the way that he did, my response was, I don't think you have to worry about competing for a championship anytime soon. So, despite, I don't think he liked that answer much. I was told I was cut off of Nitro Cold Brew after that meeting, actually. So, which is a true story. I think they truly were concerned. I think they thought, for a second, there was a possibility that, a conference or the NCAA turns around and says, well, I'm glad you're violating, our rules and our regulation. You're no longer part of our club anymore. I mean, it got to the point where we were starting to toy around with the idea of, like, well, if that happens, like, what is the doomsday scenario? Is it Florida, the state of Florida, just saying, fine, we're their own conference, right? And we're just gonna have Florida State, Miami, FSU, USF, UCF, FAU. We're gonna play each other then, fine, right? That was an idea that was even kicked around as like the worst case doomsday scenario. So I think there was a lot of people that were highly concerned. I mean, this really was a complete game changer for the NCAA, and I think they were truly concerned for themselves and the student body, that if they came down and said, look, if you're a Florida school, you can't participate in a championship again, or you can't participate in the Orange Bowl, you can't participate in these things, that they would see their own athletes then flock out of those schools, just like receiving the death penalty of sorts for a program. So I think that's where it was coming from.
I guess how quickly, once the law went into effect and the NCAA didn't kind of have any backlash, did that turn from fear over that to, well, is there any way we can, like, if the NCAA, if it's just going to be a laissez-faire approach kind of in most of the country, can we get onto that level from those administrators and coaches?
I mean, Rep, I think what we got, our phone started ringing, must have been like September of 2021, after this kind of went into effect, that we started getting phone calls from ADs, coaches, you name it, saying, hey, we've got to really take a look at this law. We have to try to make this change. Because again, no one was prepared for it. We thought we were going to be the early adopter. Mm-hmm. And then, we've been recruiting and talking to young men and women across the country saying, hey, look, come to Florida. We'll be the first one to market. But now we're starting to see, a different level of intensity at these other places across the country. And we would like to also participate the way they are as well. So I think it was pretty immediate. It was pretty quick after implementation. Did we start getting phone calls saying, hey, we got to really take a look at this state law. And unfortunately, Kurt, as you and I discussed one time, I think in person, we had a Speaker of the House who's unwilling to negotiate on this. So we had one person just kind of holding up the whole process because I think, as they so eloquently put it, it was, it was a race to the bottom. It was putting sports cars in the hands of 18-year-olds and things of that nature. So unfortunately, that was what we were dealing with. But here we are. It's a new day, and we've got it corrected. We've got it changed. We've got it updated. And we've added, wonderful things like Representative Lamarca mentioned of entrepreneurship, right? I think that's highly, highly important, because I have young men and women coming to me all the time saying, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I'm making this kind of money. Now what? What do I do? Do I create an LLC? Do I not? How do I do this? Like, what should I do with this money? And those are things that were so important to me that, Rep. Lamarca talked about it at length with a couple other folks too. And we said, entrepreneurship is really so important. We have to make sure this is being taught, because it's one thing to teach a young man or woman about balancing the checkbook or credit card debt and interest rates, but it's a whole other ball game when you start talking about, well, what's the tax burden? What is it like owning your own business? And should you have an LLC? Should you have an S corp? Should it be sole member? Right? Like, there's a lot of these questions. And frankly, I'm helping out our USF quarterback right now kind of navigate that space through the collective, because the schools weren't allowed to be a part of these things.
And Jared, let me go back. So as a good member of the Florida House, I would just tell you this regarding our past speaker. I was totally unaware that when he voted for this, because he was speaker designate, that he didn't like it. And I had to sit down and be told that, like, this was of the bills that I've seen in 8 years, or at the time 7 years. This is one of the two that I regretted voting for. I have tremendous respect for that gentleman, but this just wasn't his cup of tea. And as I forwarded those conversations to the next speaker, he had some concerns. He actually had a law partner that was concerned about some Title IX issues. We talked through those. So from a standpoint of, kind of immediacy, it was pretty quick. But I'm going to go back to something that Corey had talked about, and we all talked about, the NCAA. This was obviously, for my interest in this issue was free market based, as I said. But I wasn't ever looking to go pick a fight with the NCAA. I didn't even know we could do this, and I don't think Corey did until we saw California say, well, these schools get paid, these public schools get paid a lot of money, universities by the state. So we have some authority over them. So much so that when we actually moved the date back in the 21 session, there was some back and forth. One of the members, who's now in the Senate, actually put a line in that basically said, if the NCAA comes after us, we could, it never said NCAA, it said organization or association, could remove all of our schools from that association. So there was a immediate response on that. But I would say to you, never did I have the opportunity to speak with Mark Emmert. I have had 2 conversations with Charlie Baker, the former governor of Massachusetts, who has been who showed me to be a good negotiator on the issues with regards to the kids. I think he wants to look out for the kids first. Obviously, the NCAA is a big business, probably the biggest of it being basketball, and there are things that they're going to continue to do to keep that organization together. But I believe the governor, as the new leader of the NCAA, is going to look out for the kids. And then in the irony of all ironies, when he said how fast it had happened, first call we got back was from my dear friend Rudy Fernandez, who's vice president at the University of Miami, was, Chip, we appreciate the bill you put out there. How do we help? So we went from it being, you can't do this, to how do we help? Because I think they all realized that, I wasn't, and certainly as together as a pair in this venture, Corey and I weren't looking to upset the apple cart. We were just trying to make things fairer. And ultimately, once they saw, the interesting thing about the whole, we'll call it the gang that thought this was going to ruin college sports. I have one of my good friends and colleagues here, former Marine in the Florida House, is a Texas A&M graduate. And he said to me, he goes, well, I wasn't really for your bill, but I realized that even $30 million can't make a better Aggie team. So, I mean, it's not going to just be the money. It's going to be money well placed in the right players. You're still going to have to mold a team, and still going to have that ability to gel together and play as a team. But, it's great that kids can actually, one that really stood out, and I didn't speak to him specifically about this when we did the bill signing, but Verse, who's with Florida State, linebacker, defensive end. He had literally said to at least a couple of folks, Charlie Dudley being one of them, said, I'm going to stay another year because I can get some opportunities while I'm here, and I can also hopefully move up the draft list and get higher in the draft, which to me, that's still being able to help your family and yourself for your future, and God willing, you do better, you're going to do better for everyone when you come out at a higher number. Plus, you're staying in school for another year.
Hey, can I get a little geeky with the bill, the amendment? In there, I've read where it states that that there's no concern for fair market value, right?
Mhm.
Can you speak to that, because that seemed odd to me, that it was in there. Can you help me understand why it was in there?
Rep, I can take that one too if you want. I mean, that was something.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey. And then I have a thought on that, but the reason why, so it doesn't, the misconception isn't that we don't care.
Right. I knew there was a reason for it, and I know you do care. So I just want to, I know people have that question in their mind.
Yeah.
I'd like to give them the answer.
Good, Corey?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the free market, the market value of a contract, I mean, again, these were all things that came about going back to 2019, late 2019, early 2020, that there was a lot of concern about, right? It was a lot of concern about, well, who's going to be the arbiter of this? And we knew, even putting that in there, you know, some folks in the Senate that made sure they wanted that in there. There's some extra protections. The schools were asking for stuff like that as well. And then looking around after it launched, we said, well, you know, truly, what is market value? And that was an argument that we had kind of made early on too. Like, well, the market value is different to everybody. The market is different at Florida State than it is down at FAU, right? It's just a different market. It's a different fan base, and who's going to be the arbiter of those things. So I think ultimately what we saw over the last, year and a half, almost 2 years now of being live, it's there really is no market value. It's just like a home, right? If you want to go buy a home, well, that home is worth whatever it's worth to you who's buying that home, right? That's really what it comes down to. So, if you want that house, you're going to pay for that house, right? We can put the same house here in Fort Lauderdale, and we can put the same house up in the Panhandle, and it might be different prices. So that's just the way we thought about these things, and just didn't think it was needed anymore.
Well, one of the things, Jerry, when we did the original bill, Corey connected me with, I forget the name of the firm, but it was really kind of like a social media based kind of valuation firm that would say, all right, well, this idea is worth that, or this person's worth that. And in athletics, like, so in my thinking, we had a member that was part of the I'll call it the anti group, an Auburn guy. And he said, well, what's going to prevent Tim Cook from spending $1 million per player and buying the best Auburn team because he's an alum? So one of the things in doing that, people were trying to, I would call it spitball, but ultimately they're going to use analytics and try to figure that out. But I think the best way to do that now is for the university. Now, so a lot of this is kind of like, all right, universities, you now have the ball, do well with it, or try to get it to the other end of the field. Part of this is going to be universities reaching out to, and I'll give you an example of one of them. It's in South Florida called Athlonics. A couple of attorneys that really they're putting a technology platform together, and it's going to be the compliance piece. So are these universities doing compliance? And Corey can answer the question. Hopefully they get to a point where they are writing down all, reporting all the deals. And that's something that, that may come back to bite them a bit, because I think Governor Baker had said, one of the things, and I don't want to speak out of confidence, but, we both agreed that a repository of data or information on what these deals are worth is the biggest concern. So that's going to be a national question. And I think ultimately, the more you feed information into the machine, right, kind of like, looking at valuations of whether it's lobbyists or other consultants, Dylan Gibbons got a deal with the coffee company. It's worth, he's getting paid $1,000 a month. Somebody else got a deal with a coffee company. They're getting paid $5,000 a month. We know at that point, if there's only 2 deals done, that a deal with a coffee company of X number size is worth $1,000 and $5,000. So there may be ranges of local restaurants, car dealerships, whatever it might be. And again, it's going to be based on kind of where they are. But the more information we kind of put into the system, and the more universities do actual reporting and compliance, I think we're going to have those values. We'll be able to have a value of, all right, so between, $2,000 and $5,000 to advertise for a local chain restaurant. If someone gets one for $1 million, we know something's a little weird.
Right. Yeah, that stands out. That right now there is no market.
Mhm.
It's hard to measure what fair market is. And I guess a lot of it depends on analytics, like how many social media followers the person has. And, what's their worth.
Not to rub you, that's kind of how we were looking at it early on, because we really thought there's going to be some deals with gyms or clothing manufacturers or restaurants, car dealerships, but we really kind of saw this because I took offense to what happened to Donald Delahaye in University of Central Florida because he was doing YouTube videos. So like, what's the worth of a field goal kicker at not one of the biggest programs in the country, but a pretty damn good one? Like, what's the value of him being on YouTube? Well, really, that's going to depend on how many times you and I and Kurt and Corey watch his videos. Were they entertaining? Were they, was he trying to teach people how to kick a ball? No. He's being funny about kicking, 64-yard bombs. I mean, so when he lost his scholarship or was asked to make a decision whether he was going to go use his talents there or stay in school, I was offended that, like, why can't this kid just go out in the field on a Saturday and kick some field goals and make some YouTube videos? I mean, maybe they'll get popularity and he'll be, able to make more money in the future. And he chose the social media world and made some attempts for Canadian Football League and other stuff. But to your point, we thought when this whole thing was going to kick off, it was just going to be about influencing people on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, ways to get in YouTube, ways to get views.
Yeah, and I think Donald Delahaye is a perfect example, right? We spoke to him early on. I think right after we filed the bill, someone had connected us, and Rep. Lamarca and I jumped on a call with him, and we spoke to him and his agent. At the time, he was already gone. He was done playing, and they kind of told us what he was doing on YouTube and how much money he was making, and the situation that happened back in Orlando. And that was a sad story for us. When I hung up the phone, he said, how in the world can an institution of higher education and higher learning force someone to choose and say, hey, it's either your YouTube page or it's your scholarship, it's your education, and you being a part of this team? That's an injustice, right? That is truly an injustice. And there's no reason for that. It wasn't that he was monetizing, himself being, a member of the football team. He was monetizing himself, just happened to be, a good looking, funny kid who was able to kick footballs, right? Like, that's really what it came down to. And that was the true, pure injustice that we were able to really point back to and say, that's not cool. That's not good. We should not be making young men and young women in the state of Florida choose between making some money and their education. And that's really the impetus of this whole thing. That's really why it all started and where it came from.
Even though NIL's been around the legislation's been in effect for about a year and a half, a little over. I think we've already seen some major shifts, some changes, some things we expected, maybe some things we didn't. It's in your views, I guess, as far as Florida's law is concerned, you've kind of taken it, I would say, as far as you can, but what's your views of the future? Is there still a need for a more national law, or I guess, what do you see down the line?
Yeah, I had that conversation actually with Governor Baker. I said, we're going to do as much as we can within the confines of what's fair and equal in the state of Florida to make sure that we're all on a level playing field. But really, one legislature going into session every other year, us going in every year, different times of the year they're going in and out. I mean, someone changes the law in Georgia in May and we're already home and we're not coming back for a special. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it really needs to be, if we have an NCAA that is, and I'm not, a year ago this would have been funny or sarcastic, but we have an NCAA. If we have an NCAA that cares about the students and allows a level playing ground where they can do some do NIL deals, but it's not consuming what they're dealing with. What offended me, and I would just tell you, like, in my first iteration of this bill was going after some of the issues that we thought could be issues with the NCAA. It was we called it the hold harmless language. It was 4 pieces, and one was the liability. But we were going to attempt to take on the employee versus student athlete issue. We were going to attempt to take on, some of the issues of the universities, not just the university being able to be sued, but some of the other areas where the NCAA was incompatible with kind of what we want to do in Florida. But ultimately, I think the best thing we can do, and that's why we made we didn't repeal. There are folks who like to say we repealed the law from 2020. We really didn't. If we repealed it, we would have just taken off the statute. That would have been that. But we added the liability and we added the education piece. But we did repeal the kind of the guts of what we did before in order to level the playing field. But I think going forward, this demands a national solution. So whether it's the NCAA having the right guidelines, and Corey can speak more to that piece, but the other one is, and he's traveled to Washington to meet with members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. If they want to pass a national law that looks like Florida's framework that doesn't take away any of the rights, I think that would be, I think that's probably the best thing. But we do have to have a 50-state solution, so you don't have states kind of popping up with, here's a little more advantage over here and over there, because then, then it becomes a race to, next legislative session, more tweaks and that kind of thing. So,
yeah, I think we really do need a national solution at some point. I just don't know if that answer comes from Congress. I think the national solution very well can be and should be the NCAA themselves, right? They could have done this a year and a half ago. They could have done it 3 years ago when we first filed our legislation, and California filed their bill. They could have done this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but they just chose not to. So, I think the national solution that they keep asking for can ultimately be from themselves. And I know they're afraid of, potentially getting sued, and they're looking for some exemptions from Congress. But, I've worked in a state legislature for the last 12 years. And I would tell you, sometimes be careful what you wish for, and that was kind of the message that, I talked about with some folks up on the Hill when I went up last year. It's depending on what party's in power, it shifts. And before you know it, some things that you maybe didn't want to talk about are now being talked about. And I also just don't believe that we should rely on the federal government for much of anything. I don't think they're the ones to really solve any issues. So, I think they got bigger fish to fry right now when it comes to some world issues and some national issues. We have things like food shortages or egg shortages and stuff like that, and inflation running wild. I don't think Congress and U.S. senators are typically, too concerned about, college athletes and their name, image, and likeness. So that really is why we have state legislatures, and every state differs. And I think it's okay to be different from state to state. So I do think that, what we've done here is a good thing. And if there need to be some national guidelines, then the NCAA has the free will and free reign to do that. And I think they should.
Corey, go ahead, Jerry.
Oh, thank you. Corey, on that point, the NCAA has been sued so many times now and lost in every case that they have reason to be gun shy, I think. I mean, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't blame them. I mean, the amount of billable hours I saw that got sent over their way, I think it was like 4,600 billable hours for that one case. I get it. They claim there's not enough money to go around, but they're paying their attorney. So I think if they call up the horses and kind of got back to the root of what the NCAA truly was intended on being, which was really implementing championships and fairness and equality across the board when it comes to competitiveness, not necessarily TV contracts, and leave that up to the conferences and leave that up to the schools and deal with, I think we'd be in a much better place. Right. So, maybe that's the conservative in me, but I think they need to kind of put themselves back in the box where they belong.
Right.
Corey, Chip, we greatly appreciate the time, and I'm sure y'all are quite happy that it feels like Florida is kind of in the level playing field now after years of work to getting there, and obviously Florida athletes at Florida State and elsewhere benefiting, and that's thanks in a large part to your both of your work. So thank you so much for taking the time.
We appreciate you.